after the session. Without further ado, welcome to this session around sustainability in Createch and the launch of our new tool, sustainability tool for Createch entrepreneurs and founders. And it's going to be myself presenting, and Trevor and a couple of other colleagues will be bringing other insights to the presentation, both from the British Computing Society and from an interesting SME. Sorry. So the background, 3 years ago, we started to we got some funding to look strategic, looking out to 2030 and how, creative industries will evolve. And particularly, we were then started to really look at the impact of sustainability and also Industry 4.0 technologies. And since then, we've really updated that, and we've really honed in on the emerging area of Createch. And within that, we've really started to explore the issues with SMEs, and the tool as a result of that activity. We're also separately working in the county of Surrey on an emergent Createch cluster. But that's a conversation for another day. Moving forward, next slide, please. The agenda for today is a sort of overview of the landscape, lessons from responsible computing and green IT from Alex, Trevor introducing the tool, and then the entrepreneur's view from Nick from Ground Waves. Sorry, Nick, I forgot Ground Waves. Many apologies on a Friday afternoon. And then we'll pick up questions, and then we'll float some of the ideas we're thinking about in terms of moving forward. So really, the goals are to present the overview of the findings, then to feed into what's emerging in responsible computing and green IT, and then unveil the tool itself. What is it? What are we talking about? Then to hear from Nick and the practical challenges that he's dealing with, and emerging topics he's seeing as a Createch entrepreneur, and then to discuss what we're going to do next. So, quick overview. This really has evolved in terms of 3 years, research or so, and many of us on the call won't be surprised by a number of these points. So, what we're seeing is technology sort of weave its way into all segments of the creative industries. We've picked out a number of these, not all the 12 DCMS categories, but many different, some of the core areas. And indeed, the discussion about whether Createch is emerging as actually as a whole new sort of segment. It's certainly, in our view, feeding into the sectors, and we're looking from the point of view of the B2B technologies that are feeding into the sectors. So what, as many of you have seen, is post the budget, and creative industry is now being highlighted as one of the key 5 sectors that the UK government is focusing on alongside digital and aerospace. We've started to see from opinion formers, the term Createch starting to be used. So I'm not going to repeat them here, but Sir Peter Bazalgette, of the Creative Industries Council, and a sort of stalwart of the creative industries over 20-30 years, and now Professor Chris Smith from the Arts and Humanities Research Board. So we've started to see opinion formers in business and government starting to use the term. We've been sort of trying to work through and define what Createch is, and we came up with quite a tight definition originally that we're not going to go into today, but we're finding others, such as the two aforementioned guys, keeping it quite general. For us, we see a number of different technologies feeding into Createch, but in the core there's AI-powered platforms, there's Web.3 that still some may argue is quite conceptual at this stage, blockchain, metaverse, and then 3D capture, immersive technologies, and workflow automation and advanced analytics. So these are the four core areas that we see sitting in the heart of Createch. Next slide, please. And there is a connection to sustainability from these emerging technologies. What we've tried to do, and what we've tried to do in the tool, is to align some of the issues to the SDGs. So there are significant CO2 emissions that emerge from use of ChatGPT, even at its various levels, even with a cover that Trevor created for a report that we did. Just the creation of the cover of that report, I think, was equivalent to about boiling a kettle 20 times. So that's just at that level. If you start to think about hundreds of hours of training, of the models, you're really starting to look at quite significant CO2 emissions, energy consumption and CO2 emissions emerging from that. So it's not invisible, as some people. Magic comes with a price, as it was famously said in a TV program. So we're also seeing social issues with the use of AI in terms of different workers being brought on around the world, being paid, dollar a day type of, remuneration. Also, there are challenges, as we well know, in Hollywood, around, AI dubbing actors, concerns around that. Concerns I picked up on BBC, an author and script writer, high level, put in, into ChatGPT, write something in a short script in my style, and she was quite fearful about what came out because it was pretty close, a bit basic but pretty close. And then we've got further issues here to do with copyright, and also similarly to the energy emissions, particularly to do with the cooling. In servers, we've got, water use issues as well. So again, magic comes with a price. So, as we started to conceptually think about, and some people in some of the workshops have found it quite difficult to think about what we're terming the world behind the screen. If you think about that sort of metaphor of the iceberg, what sits above the sea, if you like, is maybe your laptop screen, and then you've got that whole host of the iceberg sitting, under the sea. So the world behind the screen. So if we look at the value chain sitting behind, games, we've got billions of gamers, and there is issues there in terms of the hardware they use, in terms of the screens, the devices they use, the power of some of those devices. Then sitting behind, then you've got tens of thousands of game studios who've got all their own equipment they're using. They're also, often SMEs themselves. So you've got, the end of life electronics issues, packaging waste, physical transportation. Then you've got emerging and thousands of Createch companies, those B2B, those thinking about those 4 core technologies. So there's thousands of these companies now starting to feed into the sector. They've again, often SMEs, they've got office equipment, they've got air conditioning, et cetera, waste electronics. And then we've got the millions of data centers that sit behind sit in a sense even further behind the cloud. So millions of data centers of various sizes. And you've got a lot of issues there with energy use, cooling, et cetera. So again, you've got a whole set of environmental impacts once you follow it through from, the customers and users. Just even in the game sector, you start to think about this in terms of film and broadcasting and the other segments, the creative industries. You've got other sets of issues, but this is just an illustration here. And obviously, we're starting to see central governments around the world, and other organizations driving net zero. And we're starting to see emerging data around the greenhouse gas emissions from all sorts of sectors. And this is something that Trevor pulled out in the research about greenhouse gas emissions across the creative industries. So we can sort of see there's monitoring going on, but there's still a long way to go to get to net zero. And for the first time really in the creative industry sector vision, there was dedicated content there around net zero and sustainability. So we're starting to see, the sector pick up on the issues, but it's perhaps not as evolved, as in other sectors. Electronic sector, for example, or the automotive sector has been dealing with, legislation, particularly around end-of-life electronics, since the mid 2000s. But you're not generally seeing that legislative push into the creative industries. The fashion sector will start to it's receiving a lot more attention from policymakers, and there will and it's very likely to be much more focus, in that sector, for example. But in some of the other sectors, you don't have that direct legislative push. So in terms of the research we did that sits behind this, we did a study of 84. We did a broader study where we identified bottom up about 300 Createch companies in the UK, various sort of clusters around the UK. And what we then did was follow up with a study to really try and investigate how these Createch companies were dealing with sustainability issues. And we found both, surprise, technology for, Createch companies was very central to the businesses, but also for many of the Createch companies, and particularly the founders, sustainability was and is important. But one of the challenges we perceived from the survey and our own experience is that whilst the founders are very concerned about it, a lot of the Createch businesses are often small, and they find it challenging to find the staff. They find it challenging to allocate their own time to drive it, and find challenges with the staff, to drive things forward. So it's just, can you take it back, Trevor? One slide, please. So what we found was that despite this concern, high-level concern, that 50% did not have documented environmental and social plans or strategies, and weren't really monitoring stuff. So there was this concern there, but a lack of formal strategy and approaches, often down to time, priorities, lack of expertise, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please, Trevor. So what we then did was to apply a maturity matrix based on something I developed quite a long time ago, but Trevor was able to transform this into something we can incorporate into our survey. And what we identified was that really, in terms of the Createch companies, relatively speaking, 74% of those Createch companies were either at a zero or at a basic level of understanding around sustainability. So whilst there is this concern, the level of action and performance was quite limited. So only 10% were termed to be advanced. And some of the barriers were around knowledge, particularly, so knowledge of, for example, sustainability regulations was high on the list, and also just knowledge effectively around how to tackle sustainability issues. So what we'd seen in a related piece of work in the advertising sector is often that in the advertising sector, they were going out to specialist consultants and contractors and not having the in-house expertise. Next slide, please. So you've heard enough from me now. So that was just a bit of an overview, and we're now pass across to Alex.
Can everyone hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can.
Super, great. So just go back there. Thank you for letting me come talk to you today. So my name's Alex Bardell. I'm the chair of the Green IT elective within British Computer Society. British Computer Society, we're a charity made up of members of people in the IT industry, and we really want to try and we're there to spread the message, to try and share information and build a community. I think that's really what we want to do. So what I want to do is talk a little bit today about sustainability and technology and how it fits together in our viewpoint of the world. And I guess just the starting point is we see sustainability as the sustainability of technology itself. So this is the carbon emissions associated with technology, and the pollution associated with the IT infrastructure. And the other bit is how technology is an enabler to support sustainability. So how big data analytics, artificial intelligence can be used in a way that help us meet some of our sustainability goals. So obviously the starting point is climate change, and it is an issue. And we're really being asked about whether we can do mitigation, how we adapt the world for the new climate, and how we can compensate people who are suffering climate change issues. And finally, how are we going to get to 2050 and net zero? And I think that's an important starter, but I guess the real validity is if you're a company, what's it got to do with you? I mean, if you're trying to pay for your dividends and your shareholders, it's always important, but what is the driver? And I think this is where, when I first was part of sustainability, we would go to organizations and clients, and they would say, yeah, I wholeheartedly believe in this myself, but I have to answer to my shareholders, and therefore I have different business drivers. But that's beginning to change now, and there are some real clear drivers for why sustainability is an important part and one of the pillars within an organization. And I guess the starting point is it's important to employees. So particularly now, if you're getting younger employees coming into a company, they really want to know that the company they're working for is sustainable, that it actually has a good message, and therefore being able to iterate why you are a sustainable company is important and actually helps you get some of the more talented employees you're looking for. Investors are being driven, and investment decision is being driven by the ability of a company to actually say that they are sustainable. And so we've got the environmental, social, and governance reporting, which is saying it's going to be easier and cheaper to get hold of finance if you can say you're a sustainable company. And similarly, consumers want the companies that they're buying things from to be able to prove they're sustainable as well. And I guess there's more to sustainability than climate change. So if we look at all of the UN sustainability goals, it's about the planet, it's about resources, it's about how we actually look after everything that we have. And I think from the IT industry, and if you're consuming IT, there's a whole selection of materials and machines and energy and resources being used to make this technology. And this technology then becomes, at the end of its life, it needs to be reused, recycled. And it's how do we actually look at that? And this is a big problem because the IT industry generates a huge amount of waste. So obviously we talked a little about sustainability development goals. Oh, can you go back one, please? So these are kind of key to the sort of basis of where we get a lot of our ideas from. They came out of the UN in 2012. And as we transition to net zero, the role of IT in terms of delivering zero carbon, and also the role of IT to actually deliver against some of the other goals in like responsible consumption and sustainable cities is key. Next slide, please, Trevor. Next slide, please. So COP26, Glasgow Climate Pact, the UK legally bound itself to net zero by 2050. We also committed to 68% cut in emissions by 2030. So there's a big task to be going on, and a lot of this is going to be pushed off into industry and pushed off to people like yourself to actually start delivering it. Next slide, please, Trevor. So let's talk first of all about this scope 1, 2, 3 reporting, your greenhouse gas emissions. So we initially started off with scope 1, which is direct emissions. So this is the fuel that you consume, the steam that you generate. These are the things that you can tangibly save from your firm. This is where you're consuming carbon. Now, if you're a tech startup, you probably say that's not really relevant. Indirect, these are things like the electricity you're consuming, the gas, the indirect emissions where you're consuming the deliverables. And again, if you're a small company, this is probably not going to be a huge amount, maybe a bit of office space, something like that. But the big one, which is becoming legally binding, and the UK is committed to this, is that the indirect greenhouse gas emissions. This is everything associated with your supply chain and your consumption from third parties. And where this is quite important is that, if you're consuming a large amount of compute to deliver your algorithms, to deliver your programs, this is consuming a large amount of energy within a data center somewhere, and these emissions then become your emissions, and you will need to report these emissions. And even if you're a small company with a few people, but with a massive compute footprint, you're going to be expected to start reporting your carbon emissions. And similarly, you're expecting your suppliers who are supplying you some of this to start doing the same and reporting it as well. So this is why it becomes more important. And I guess the final point why this is relevant is that obviously we're at scope reporting now, but the objective is to achieve net zero. This is just the first step. The next step is actually to start reducing it and actually having a carbon reduction plan and actually being able to say how you're going to get to net zero. And this is a bit more challenging if you're not directly in control of those emissions because they're being delivered by a third party. Next slide, please. So there are ways that you go out. There's organizations and lots of people who are there to help understand what your carbon emissions and what responsible computing is. So responsible computing is, I guess it's a kind of a membership organization made up of the BCS, a part of it, IBM, Dell, and really they are trying to explain how to be responsible, how to look at your IT infrastructure, provide help and guidance. But this is just one example. There are a number of people doing it. Any of the big consultancy companies now can help in terms of having sustainability reporting, and also how you can actually move your journey to net zero and become a more sustainable company. Next slide, please. Now, interestingly, we talk about the IT industry having carbon emissions of 5% total emissions, maybe to 10% total emissions, and we talk about the computers and the data centers and the networks. But I mean, I think something that's been kind of overlooked a little bit is it's software. It's the software that's actually driving the computers, which are driving the data centers, which are consuming the energy. And what really has happened in recent years is that the relationship between software and computer has been broken. And a lot of this is because things like cloud, where you're consuming compute as a service, therefore you're not directly in relationship to the computers themselves, they're running somewhere else. I think another big challenge is that it's become a lot easier and cheaper to actually get hold of compute. And so back in the day when people were writing programs in C, there was very little compute available, and therefore they had to be very, very careful about the software they were writing. Now compute is very cheap. It's less of an incentive. The incentive is about speed, it's about functionality, it's about delivering software to your clients, but it's not so much focusing on the sustainability bit of it. And this probably needs to change and will change if the IT industry is going to be able to get its emissions down and if we're going to achieve net zero. Next slide, please. So there are some guiding principles of green software, and it's about thinking about how to code efficiently, how to code sustainable software, thinking about what shared libraries are going to be loaded up, and what sort of software language you're going to do. And therefore, without looking at the carbon emissions, it's quite difficult. But there are things like the Sustainable Coding Foundation and the Green IT Foundation who can help build frameworks in terms of what sustainable coding looks like and what a developer should think about when they're actually writing their code. Next slide, please. So one of the really interesting facts, and this was from a research project by Green Labs, is that there's a huge disparity in terms of how software itself runs and how efficient it is. So obviously, the most energy efficient software is something like C, but when you start looking at some of the more modern digital-based packages like Ruby and Python, the efficiency differences between Ruby, Python, C, and maybe Java is huge. We're saying that the energy footprint of C is 1 and Python is 75.8. I mean, that's a massive jump. So when someone's writing software, it should be cognizant that, yes, okay, if you have something like Python and you need to write a little bit of a sort of digital web-facing widget, then that's fine. But when that extrapolates out to the fact that your software might be downloaded 1 billion times for a game, and that little widget is that much more inefficient than something written in a different language, well, then the sort of cumulative effect of this is much bigger. And therefore, it's important to think about the language. There's some clear guiding principles, which is, don't load unused features and libraries and software loops, and kind of monitor the energy use of your software as you're sort of developing it. And by doing that, you can test it in the same way as you test functional features or non-functional features. Next slide, please.
Alex, 5 minutes to go.
I've got my little clock here. So when you're thinking about software and making it more efficient, there's this big thing. We talk about dark data. And if you're doing some big data analytics or things like that, there's a huge proportion of your data which is never actually used. It's saying like some studies saying that in some cases 65% of that data is sitting there, and that data is using energy, it's using disk drives, it's using CPU cycles. So in terms of looking at the Green Software Foundation, have devised a set of principles and patterns and practices to help you think about how you deliver more sustainable code. And in terms of actually testing it, you want to use automation, and part of your automated processes should be about including testing for sustainability. Next slide, please. So similarly, when you're doing your testing, you do your load test, stress test, volume test. These would be traditional non-functional performance. You should include there an element which looks at sustainability. So if you're using a lot of compute to deliver a number of routines or code functionality, then possibly that should be flagged as a defect, and you should go back again and look at how that code's being developed to develop it in a way to make it more sustainable. I'm running low on time. Next slide, please. Lots of companies don't actually have their own IT infrastructure anymore. So what's really important is to understand that if you're buying your technology as a service from a third party, it really then becomes a sustainability question. And it becomes a question for the procurement department rather than a question of your own carbon emissions. So really interestingly, the government released the digital data and technology playbook, so it's probably well worth looking at this. And within there is a section talking about sustainable procurement. Now, if you want to supply IT services to the government, you will probably need to meet some of this criteria yourself, but it's also a good starting point to think about, does your supplier have the concept of a carbon reduction plan? Can they prove that they have a good set of standards? Do they have carbon emission reporting, scope 1, 2, 3? Have they met an ISO standard? And these are all the things that should be considered when you're actually procuring IT services from a third party, because that helps in terms of delivering a more sustainable IT infrastructure for yourself. Next slide, please. I'm going to run out of time now. So, and also similarly, do your IT suppliers or your data center suppliers, have they met a certain standard? Now, the problem is lots of certifications out there, they don't mean anything. So is this a valid certification? Something like the ISO or the EU Code of Conduct for Data Centers. These are standards which have been underpinned by rigorous testing, and to adhere to these standards, you have to meet a certain criteria. And it's just being careful to make sure that your suppliers actually do deliver against some of these things. Next slide, please. So I think I'm going to run out of time. Next slide, please, Trevor. So UK generates second highest waste. Okay, I'm just going to summarize here because I've got 1 minute left. So what's really important to think about it, if you have your own technology or you're buying technology, the risk is we don't want to send old computers to landfill. So what we really need to consider is, how can we recycle? And how can we reuse? So once your kit has reached the end of its life, it might be a suitable candidate for a different job within your organization, or it might be suitable to go out to a third party in case you can sell it on to the reselling market. If it does need to be recycled, it should really be recycled responsibly. What's happened to most waste is it has been shipped away to countries who are unable to recycle it properly, and that's caused big environmental problems for these countries. And there's some very toxic materials in e-waste, but there's also some very valuable materials in terms of rare earth metals, gold, which we really want to recycle. So part of your policy is to have a sensible and sustainable way of end of life in your kit, and a legitimate way of actually sending your kit to the second user market, but in a way that is not unsustainable. And I think I've run out of time now, so if you just zip to the end, please. So in summary, I guess sustainability needs to be owned within your organization. There are some goals to be measured. So that we've got the SDGs, we've got corporate and social responsibility. You can develop software against the Sustainable Software Foundation. There's legislation that's going to be in place, ESGs and scope 1, 2, 3 reporting. There are some valid standards out there, so make sure people adhere to those standards. And get guidance for things like the Digital and Technology Playbook. Also, all of the main consultancy companies now have a sustainable procurement process. And if you want to look somewhere else, there's obviously the Responsible Compute initiative, but also the Carbon Trust, Principle Green. And similarly, we have some training courses at BTS we've developed, which will help you understand how to make your organization more sustainable in relation to its technology footprint. And that was very quick. Normally this is a longer presentation, but I had to try and squeeze it into 15 minutes. So hopefully that's been informative.
Thank you very much, Alex. And it's over to me now. So I'm just going to show you a few slides to get started, to talk about how we develop the tool. Then I'm going to give you a demonstration, and the tool is live at this moment. So you're going to be very welcome to use it immediately after the event today. So you probably know there's a lot of tools out there that are called sustainability. So why do we need another one? Well, Martin and I for 3 years have been talking to founders and people involved in setting up Createch, particularly in the UK, but also internationally. And we constantly hear the mess from them that we need something that's very specific to them. And often they would say, sure, you know, we can make use of some of the leading toolkits that are out there. And Albert is the one that often gets mentioned from high-end TV, but it's not really a very good fit for what we do. It's really based around projects and productions, and we are offering some kind of 24/7 service. I think the other thing as well is when it comes to sustainability in Createch, as you've heard over the last 2 presentations, there are some very specific topics, particularly in terms of using things like generative AI. A number of the Createchs that Martin and I talked to have built their own data centers, but they don't really know how to operate them particularly effectively. And we also know that Createch entrepreneurs are spending a lot of time hunting for reliable information on sustainability. And then I guess there are some very specific things to do with early stage Createchs in particular, which is that they are very R&D intensive. So how do you win R&D grants, and what is the role of sustainability within that? And so we set out to develop a new tool. We did a paper version of it last year. The feedback was, it's great, but get it on the web. And so we've run a number of focus groups over the back end of last year and into this year to really explore what CTOs, CEOs, and founders of Createch want. And we've used 4 personas to do that. So one persona is an arts graduate who is very interested in technology, maybe wants to do something around digital fashion or circularity. Another one is somebody who maybe has come out of the film or kind of voiceover industry and is quite technical, wants to set up something that will have a social impact. Another one is a serial entrepreneur, particularly somebody who's from a more software and technology background. And then the final one is somebody who finds themselves in the position of running as the CEO at Createch that maybe is a couple of years old. And so we use these to do some design thinking, as you do. And we also try to characterize the primary audience that we're trying to talk to with the tool. And as Martin mentioned, it is these business-to-business Createch companies, the ones that are supplying services and technology into fashion companies, into advertising, into virtual production in TV, into the games industry. And these are the ones that tend to be very energy or resource intensive. And also we wanted to really play to businesses rather than projects. There's a lot of projects in the Createch area. So we wanted people who were generating money. And so they had that classic kind of triple bottom line dilemma to deal with. From our research, we know that a lot of these companies actually do feel very strongly about social and environmental purpose. And so we want to really, again, play to the ones that have got these strong alignments with, for instance, the Sustainable Development Goals. And then, as Martin mentioned earlier, we have this benchmarking called ZBIA, Zero, Basic, Intermediate, and Advanced. And what we wanted to do was really kind of help the ones that are at the bottom of that scale, which is the majority. You'll have heard a lot of talk today about the UK. We start our research in the UK, but actually we have much more kind of broad ambitions than that. We've been doing a month's worth of beta testing on the tool, for instance. You can see the locations that we've gone to here. I'm very pleased to report everybody seems to like it. It's stayed technically up, seems to have a relatively low carbon footprint, which is probably good since we're talking about sustainability. So again, it's this sense of it's an international tool for Createch CTOs, CEOs, and founders. So what does it do? Well, its core functionality is around generating a maturity score, placing you on this benchmark scale from 0 to advanced, using the data that we collected in 2022. And then out of that, it produces some personalized guidance on how to improve based on how you've answered and the score. And then we've given it some functionality to allow people to come back, say, every 3 months and see how they're improving. So obviously the benefits for this is that you're getting access to some guidance, and you're not having to pay for it. All of the kind of educational information that people are saying they're missing, for instance, around regulations, is in one place. We've put obviously links into external content such as British Computer Society and the Sustainable Computing Initiative, but many others as well. And we've given people some way to measure progress, which is at the end of the day what people were asking for. Now, what it isn't is a carbon calculator, and you'll see that in a few moments when I get into the demo. So how is the tool actually structured? The tool has obviously a landing page, and from the landing page, you can either access some resources and do nothing else, Or you can go on to answer the maturity questionnaire and see your results, and then find some ways of working with the results. And what we've done is we've generated a kind of a badging system, which is based on the idea of an acorn turning into a spreading oak tree. And this actually came out of some of the focus groups that we ran, and we hope you like this kind of organic metaphor. Behind the tool is about 80 pages of original content. You can see all of the different areas that we've put content in for. That content obviously will grow over time. We will be looking for guest editors and guest content producers at some point in the future, which Martin will come back to at the end of today. And then finally, here is the kind of benchmarking system that we're using. So you can get a sense of how we're trying to communicate to people in a very simple way what their score actually means, rather than going into lots and lots of very detailed description right up front. Again, just to reiterate what Martin said, 74% are at the zero or basic level, at the zero or basic level of maturity. We know it's quite difficult to progress to intermediate and advanced. If you want to know more about that, then I suggest you have a look at the report that we did on Createch, where we talk about some of the big challenges that people face to move forward. But hopefully our tool will address some of that for some people. We did, at the request of our focus groups, put in an account creation capability, and we'd like to encourage people to do that. The reason for that is that you get access to some nice visualizations, progress over time, and you get the ability, obviously, to store your results and go back and interrogate them and try and understand what it is that you're actually doing that's helping you to improve. So, against my image of demonstrating robots, I think it's probably time to do a little bit of a demonstration of the tool. So your screens will go blank for a second while I just turn off the PowerPoint. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the tool for you to have a look at. So you should be able to see the tool on the screen now. So when you first arrive at the tool, there's a couple of things. It will prompt you to tell us who you are. You don't have to, but it would be very nice to know who we're talking to. If you do click on that, you go out to SurveyMonkey, just 2 or 3 questions, nothing much. The tool does use pop-ups in a couple of places. So there is some information at the top of the screen, which you can click on if you're not sure how to enable that in whichever browser that you're using. And of course, if you want to tell people about the tool, you can share on X and on LinkedIn. So there's some welcoming text from Martin and myself, a little bit of an explanation of why this is a good tool to use now, a bit of an introduction to how it works, and in particular, this 0 to advanced scale, a little bit of explanation there. And then, as you'd expect, a little bit about who it's for and the benefits. Now, I mentioned that there's a lot of content behind the tool, and we wanted to put that front and center for people. So you can see some of the materials that you can access directly without doing anything else on this screen. So Martin was talking about the world behind the screen. Let me just open that up. So what we've done here is we've given people a lot of information about how you go about thinking about data center efficiency, for instance. Some of the very specific actions you need to take if you're a Createch company, either building or buying in data center services. Then in particular, because of the rise of generative AI and other forms of machine learning, we've given a lot of detail on how you think about reducing the energy consumption in using that technology. And then finally, we've given quite a bit of information on how you think about improving the energy efficiency of models. And as Alex said, most people actually do buy their services in from technology providers. So we've given a checklist for people to use. So for each of the major topic areas, that's the kind of level of information. I'll just open one more up, carbon calculation. So here we can see the different scopes that Alex was talking about. And we talk about how that impacts on different Createchs. And then we talk about how you create a carbon management plan. And then if you want a carbon calculator, we've identified about 40 of them, which we think are relevant to the creative industries more generally and to Createch in particular. And so you can just click on the links here to get to those. So those are all in one place. So there's quite a lot of information available without doing anything. And there's a couple of explainer videos at the bottom of the page. So when you're ready, you can just click on the button to bring you to the questionnaire, 17 questions. You can look at these at your leisure afterwards. I'm just going to quickly go through and click a few buttons and just illustrate a couple of points. So let's imagine that you're not really very clear on what it means by, is there a senior person responsible for sustainability? You can click on that link and you'll see a little bit more explanation of that question. So for every question, there's a little bit more detail to be had. So I'll just keep on clicking away, twiddle your thumbs while I do this. It doesn't take very long. Obviously, there's a bit of terminology in here, like different standards. Again, you can click on that and it will tell you what you need to know. And I know I finished because the submit button in the bottom right-hand corner has gone blue. And when I hit that button, up comes my score. And in this case, I'm doing fantastically. I've got a score of 8 out of 10. So only 16% of that level of maturity, but there's still room to improve. And so for every question, you get a little explanation card that gives you some suggestions on where you need to focus to improve your score. So again, I won't go through all of those because there are 17 of them. So when you've processed that, you can go to the next step. And the next step is basically about working with your results. You'll notice in the middle of the screen, there's a prompt to download a calendar event. You just click on that, it will already download a file ready for importing into any major calendar program. And that will prompt you in about 3 months' time to come back. 3 months for some people might be too long. Six weeks might be better for some. Shorter than that, maybe nothing will have improved. And then what we give you is additional information, which tells you all about the different levels, just to give you a sense of what it might really take to progress from one level to another. And then finally, on this last page of the tool, we have some additional resources. So there's a nice presentation from Martin here, giving some background on Createch, particularly in the UK. We've got links to the Creative Industries Council. There's some links to innovation funding for UK businesses, green IT, and responsible computing. Again, this list will get updated over time. So just one last thing before I hand over to Nick. You can log in. I'm just going to turn sharing off for a second because one slight feature of my Safari browser is it will in fact delight in showing you my my user ID, which I obviously don't want to share for good security reasons. I will turn the sharing back on in 2 seconds. Go. So if you do log in, which obviously requires you to create an account, we just ask, I think it's just 2 questions. It's not one of these ones where we're trying to harvest lots of information off you. You then get access to this button at the top of the screen called the dashboard. When you open up the dashboard, what you get are 2 visualizations. One visualization is the progress in your score over time. You can see I'm doing really well. And then the second is a breakdown of how you actually answered over the last 5 times that you use the tool. So you can see these different emojis for how you've answered and a color coding, which gives an indication of whether it's a more strongly positive result. And then on the left-hand side, you can see there are some buttons to press. So I'm just going to press on Q5. What it does is it brings up the question that you answered, and also just, again, that description of what that question actually means. So that's the tool. It's intended to be used to develop strategy, to develop policy, to ask the right questions of your own kind of team and of your suppliers. It gives you access to carbon calculators, but it isn't a carbon calculator. And maybe that's some functionality that we might consider building at some point in the future. So that's a tool. I'd like to pass over now to Nick, who has been very important in terms of our journey with developing the tool, but also has a very interesting startup of his own. So I'm just going to switch back over to the PowerPoint presentation. And Nick, over to you.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate Trevor and Martin inviting us to speak about the Createch perspective of an SME. And I appreciate Alex today speaking about how we can be more sustainable in IT, which is really important. So, Groundwaves, Hear, Feel, Connect. We're a haptic technology company. A bit of an agenda today. I'll speak about myself, a little bit of an introduction, how I got involved in the Createch space and with Trevor and Martin's tool, and then also about what Groundwaves is doing to tackle the sustainability problem with our product. So first of all, a bit about myself. My name is Dr. Nick Inouye. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Groundwaves. I'm an inventor, is what people would call me. I've got a background in electrical electronic engineering, bachelor's from Cardiff, and I went on from there and I did a PhD in nuclear fusion energy, also at Cardiff. And I've always got a natural curiosity for finding the best engineering solution possible. So that's sort of my drive. And next slide, please, Trevor. So, from fusion to fashion. Groundwaves haptic technology has been developed over the past 14 years, improved thanks to the feedback of 1,000 more end users. We started the journey back in 2008 when I was a year in industry in BAE Systems. You know, as an intern, they get you to do the dangerous and dirty work. And this company was testing its missiles for vibration. And so they put this on this massive vibration table about the size of a car. And they shake these things to see, you know, how much they can take. And of course, as an intern, they put me right next to the machine to do some testing. So I was there with several layers of hearing protection. I couldn't hear anything, but I could feel everything. And I thought at that moment, is there a way to take this big machine and make it more compact so we could get an extended feel of sound? That's super bass, that's stuff that you only get at a live music event. And that cascaded now the past 15 years of research. First of all, developing mainly the technology behind the haptics. So developing this haptic vibration motor, which we developed in about 2010. And we put that into a chair with substrate haptic seat. And this was a full body experience of sound. So you can hear a photo on the left. Each of those panels has a different frequency which resonates out. So you sort of can split sound up into its different components. That's a really interesting sensation that I invite you to try at some point. So taking it from the chair, basically, I took it to a lady called Dame Evelyn Glennie, who's a very famous percussionist, virtuoso. And she said the chair was one of the best experiences of sound she's ever had. But that the footplate wasn't as good as it could be, and that the feet are very important to feeling low frequency sounds. And so that then inspired the idea for something which is a wearable device, and that cascaded then into the research into haptic shoes, which we've taken from 2018 onwards. First of all, developing the wired prototype, then wireless prototype, and thereon in to come up with the Groundwaves brands and the direction. So effectively, Groundwaves allows you to listen in your headphones while you get the feeling of vibration in your feet. And that gives you what's called like an illusion of loudness. So you really do feel like you're in front of a live music event or something. There's a very natural feeling to get vibration in the feet up, whereas in the seat, obviously it's on through the back. Although it's a nice experience, it isn't a natural feeling experience. Next slide, please. So our technology is based around our licensable haptic platform. We've got a number of, we've got a granted patent for our haptic drive system, and we've got a couple of pending patents for our actuator. And we've got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the UK to set the Dolby standard for haptics using this technology that we've developed. Effectively, the actuator is a very specialized type of voice coil type actuator, very similar to a speaker that you have. Instead of moving a cone to move air, we're moving a weight to create a reaction force which we can feel as vibration. Alongside that, we've got our drive system which drives our haptics, which basically calibrates to you in your bodies, because everybody's body will have a different frequency characteristic. And so to be able to get that feeling of low frequencies the same as high frequencies, you need to calibrate the system to be able to get that sort of flatness between feeling low and higher frequencies. Next slide, please. So, why haptic shoes? Well, I think the adage "everything, everywhere, all at once" is very appropriate, because over the past 15 years, it has only been in the past 2 years where everything is happening, where Groundwaves is going to work. One of the big drivers, of course, is this launch of Apple's AR headset next year. And I think that's a big driver for now wearable technologies. Another thing is we've got this thing of a lot of big brand collaborations where big brands like Meta are partnering with Ray-Ban. So we've got an interesting ability to maybe join companies together which haven't necessarily got anything mutual. Also, Nike and a lot of footwear brands are searching for the next big thing in footwear. We've also got from the footwear side us moving into 3D printing. So to reduce our carbon footprint and having all this tooling lying around in stock, we can print on demand, and which means we need less tooling and storage space. And of course, haptics is a big thing at the moment, so we're in the right place. Next slide, please. So where are we then in Createch? Well, I'm thankful that this new domain is being pushed by people like Peter Bazalgette, because Createch hasn't really been a space that is been big in the business scene. And it's certainly great to find a place where we actually fit, because we've got a very defendable technology, but we're also a fashion brand company as well. So Createch is a great place where we can fit. And so we're really happy to have got, recognized for our work. The Creative Industries Council, we ordered 100 ones to watch. And also we were sent as a representative of the UK in fashion tech to Dubai as part of their Expo 2020. So it's a great honor to finally get some recognition for our work. And also more recently, we just won 2 grants, each worth £50,000. One is thanks to the Digital Catapult My World scheme, and the other is the Innovate UK scheme called Creative Catalyst. So those are 2 key grants that can enable us to develop both our actuator and our drive system. So we're getting closer to getting you the Groundwaves experience. Next slide, please. So a bit about where we fit in with what Martin and Trevor have been doing. I myself have been helping on their focus groups and giving feedback, which is really great to see Martin and Trevor actually putting together something that we can expand to the UK and beyond. So I hope Trevor's demonstration of the tool earlier gave you a bit of an insight of what we've been working on. I think some of the specifics that we helped on with the tool's interactivity, because if it's a tool for creative businesses, You want it to be interactive. You don't want it to be just a printout form and fill it out in paper. I think we helped them prioritizing some sustainability goals from small businesses, so people actually know where they are and where they can go. And also then working on Martin and Trevor's great idea of creating cluster networks and strong clusters and then trying to connect them out. And this is maybe how we can get the UK to sort of innovate better and connect better. All right, next slide, please, Trevor. So our sustainability mantra in Groundways relies on 3 key points. First of all, pick your battles wisely. We all want to do good. We all want to try and be clean, but there are only certain things you will be able to do and your business will be able to do at certain times. So first of all, pick your battles wisely. Always think about life cycle management of your product. So what's it, how you're going to buy it in, what's the supply chain for it, what's the supply chain disposing of it. And also to think about always putting sustainability in your design where possible. All right, next slide. So what are we in Groundwaves doing to be more sustainable? Well, our main thing is to reduce images like this. This is not a pleasant image. There's a lot of gas there. There's a lot of toxic materials being churned up from the ground. As Alex said, we need to be more sustainable in how we process things. So our key topic is for precious metals, because this is one of the key areas of sustainability. Next slide, please. So we've been very lucky enough to partner with a company called Hypermag. Now, I said ours is a voice coil actuator, which is similar to a speaker. All speakers use a permanent magnet, and the magnets we use tend to be precious metal magnets. So we've Hypermag have developed a new technique to be able to take old hard drives, which are from server farms, and then to turn these hard drives, magnets inside them, back into powder, when they can recompress them into a new magnet. So our actuator is going to have a recycled magnet in, which reduces 98% of the toxic legacy when compared to a virgin material of neodymium. So we're really trying to reduce our impact there. And I think it's the precious metal side of things which is more prevalent in our product. Alongside that, obviously, we're thinking about a modular shoe, which means you can sort of interchange parts without having to throw away the whole thing. So sustainability in design. And I think that's it. Thank you, Trevor.
Thank you. So Martin, I think it's time to open up to the floor for a little bit of discussion and feedback from people. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, are there any particular questions that the presentations brought to mind? I mean, from our perspective, and particularly my perspective, we are sitting in perhaps the 5th green wave. If I think back to when I was at Rio in 1992, that was in the aftermath of the 2nd green wave. So this isn't the first time we've had sort of waves of interest, and each wave is different. And I think in the sort of 4th wave, if you like, it was sort of characterized by a lot of the growing awareness amongst young people, before COVID. And we started to see, we even forgot the thousands or hundreds of thousands of young people on the streets demonstrating around particularly climate change, and, slightly morphing into that issues around marine plastics. And I think the 5th wave has been affected also by COVID, where we continue to see the concerns around climate change, but also nature and biodiversity. And we started to also see the conventions now being picked up on this. But also there's issues like community and the social dimensions coming into this as well. So each of these waves are slightly different, but it's not the first time we've seen some of these things. But I think what we're seeing in the creative industries is, you know, for the first time, really, it was put forward in the sector review. And as the Createch sector, as we've illustrated, and Nick shows, you know, as a real company in the sector, there are different sets of issues sort of emerging, particularly for those type of companies around, you know, the energy, electronics, etc., etc. So any thoughts? Does anybody think, in terms of the presentation on the tool, that we've missed something out? Was anything unclear? We would welcome any feedback, or Trevor and I may ask you directly.
Well, actually, Martin, just to give people a bit of time to gather their thoughts, there's quite an interesting post in the chat, which is somebody said, look, you know, there are new programming languages coming that are going to shift a lot of the processing into the, you know, the GPU space. And they mention in particular Mojo, which is getting quite a lot of press in the kind of software development world at the moment. But I think there's also this sense that more of this kind of energy intensive processing for generative AI is going to start taking place out at the edge on end user devices. And I think that's going to make the kind of e-waste situation even more challenging, because, you know, it's one thing if you've got a nice clean kind of server farm, but if you're dealing with people who are powering their iPhones off, you know, coal-fired power stations somewhere in the world and then throwing them away every 9 months, that's not a good place to be. So again, it would be very good just to kind of hear, you know, from the audience. I mean, how do they see, you know, this value chain for Createch developing, you know, the ones that are in the Createch field at the moment? I mean, you know, do you see the same challenges as us, or do you see something different?
I mean, just another couple of things building on what Trevor's saying. What we've seen, particularly with Createch companies, they're relatively young and innovative, like Nick's company, often, you know, quite working interdependently with the research bodies, looking at, you know, looking to gain research grants. And so sustainability questions are more and more coming into UKRI bids, and the ability to respond with appropriate language in those bids is becoming more and more of an issue. So, you know, are people starting to pick up more external drivers, either from funders, from clients? You know, are you starting to see it emerging in, you know, conversations with your R&D partners, or if you're selling into the chain to large players like Sky or BBC, are you starting to see more things flow down the line? Or, you know, do you think you will start to see more stuff emerging? All very quiet on the Western Front. Well, maybe
Philip,
people don't want to
Philip, you're remarkably quiet. I think you should say something.
Maybe people don't want to say stuff in the public domain.
They're too shy. I suggest in that case, Martin, let's kind of move on to our kind of roadmap and sum up, and maybe that will spark some extra kind of questions and dialogue.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Trevor. And you know, the core area that we're really looking to develop next amongst these various bullets is the idea of a peer-to-peer network, where we bring people together, you know, to discuss their experiences and really facilitate those that are tackling the issues in the Createch sector, you know, to share their knowledge and experience with others. So we would just use our varying skills to help set something up, you know, for people to share knowledge and experience, and generally, but also knowledge and experience of using the tool. So hopefully that by using the tool, that may lead to sort of new questions, and you know, areas where information needed, or more importantly, experience. How have people tackled the issues? Both Trevor and I have seen the success of those sorts of networks, you know, in actually tackling, you know, business problems between business. And I'm separately running one of these peer-to-peer networks in something else I organise, particularly, and it's providing it's acts as a very useful platform for people who are starting on a journey on that particular topic, with those that are much more advanced providing input, and you're starting to see over time the knowledge builds. But so this might be a broader peer-to-peer network, it might be smaller groups. We would have to tackle issues like make sure there is the people joining in the meeting, either we're discussing perhaps in that meeting cross-cutting issues, or if there was something more specific, we would ensure that it was non-competitive, and that may well be an issue, you know, in the sector, ensuring, you know, that people are comfortable that they're not disclosing stuff they don't want to discuss. So that's something that we're going to be trying to work on, and we would welcome people engaging on that if they've got ideas or things that we really need to think about in that area, or challenges with those sort of networks you found before, or things that have worked well. We'd be really interested to hear from you on that. We're also linked to that, thinking carefully and selectively about targeted webinars and possible training, and you know, areas to really also particularly enhance the tool as well. So if there are others out there who would like to engage more with the sort of further iteration of the tool, we would welcome, as Trevor mentioned earlier, guest editors, you know, content providers. You know, obviously we would work through a process to try and keep that as objective as possible. But essentially, the main short-term focus where we will be raising awareness of activities will be in this sort of P2P area. And as Trevor mentioned, I'm having problems with my words, forgetting things on a Friday afternoon. Sorry about that, guys. But also, you know, we were looking to expand this globally because we believe that this is a unique tool, and it brings in effectively, you know, Trevor and I's, you know, fairly extensive experience since, you know, the sort of 90s around sustainability, you know, Trevor's experience in technology and our joint experience in the emerging Createch field. So we think it's built on a fairly solid foundation. I think, again, from the extensive work I've dealt with in micro SMEs in many areas, this is where the ZBIA model came from, and essentially says that often many companies, even though they don't want to say it, are at a much lower level of awareness and understanding than they like to state in the public domain. And contrary to that, most of the information is very advanced and complex. So to actually help a lot of smaller micro companies move forward, the information needs to be really clear, very well organized, needs to have buzzwords removed where possible. And that's what we've really tried to do, keep stuff really designed for the reality levels of companies, but actually helping people move through those levels. And sort of linked through to moving to higher levels, of course, we're available if specific collaborative projects wanted to emerge, or if you wanted more dedicated resource in terms of moving yourself from intermediate to advanced. Trevor and I are available for further discussions. Hopefully that made some sort of sense. And do we have any further questions? I mean, Trevor's just put up where you can access the tool.
Yeah, I think there's, I mean, there's, again, there's a kind of, it's more of a kind of a statement, but there's a kind of a question behind it, which is, the statement is, there's a real risk of greenwashing, in the sector, or more generally, is this tool going to help? And what I've actually replied in the chat is, we've written a whole section, for instance, on responsible content. We've put some links into initiatives such as Add Green to help people understand how the media side of the world is kind of dealing with that. And we put links in also to many of the fashion initiatives, which are trying very hard to deal with that. So yes, it's a known issue, and hopefully one we've partially addressed.
Yeah, I mean, the key thing is, if you work yourself way through the tool and the content, you will be in a position where you understand that greenwashing is not a good idea. So, even back in the first book I did in 1992 on called Greener Marketing, what I was talking about in that second green wave, that what's different in the sustainability issue, and it's equally true now, that claims need to be based on solid information and data. You cannot let the copywriter's pen run wild and free on this. So, it's cautious. It's, our advice, I would say, through the tool and collectively, is understand your impact, think it through, and base claims on information. It's not just a sound strategy to avoid greenwashing. What you're now seeing is, particularly in the European Commission, they are tightening up on green claims. The various advertising bodies now are starting to tighten up on green claims and call companies out. There's still a lack of fines, which if one's looking on a macro level, so you get a pat on, or a ruler bash on the fingers, but maybe that's going to tighten up. But you don't really want to be held out in the press, being called out by an advertising body for greenwashing, because that can affect brand and corporate reputation. And you've seen this with organisations like Adidas and others. I know I've been doing a bit of work in this, over-claiming the amount of recycled polymers from fishing nets in their shoes, for example. So you're seeing more and more people being called out for it. So getting back to the beginning, I think we feel confident if you work your way through the tool, you would get a much clearer idea of the issues you should be thinking about in your communication strategy. And our advice is to base it on good, solid data and information, and then add the creativity.
So I've just put a message back to Kieran to just say a little bit more about green hushing. So just while he's kind of responding on that, some late breaking news. First of all, the links to the tool are on the screen. You can either just scan that QR code, or you can follow the links. If you're just typing in, the short link is the one to go for. I can see that 5 people are using the tool at the moment. So thank you very much if you're still on the call, or if that's one of the reasons you maybe popped off a little bit earlier, then you're in our thoughts. Kieran, are you still there? Yeah, do you want to just say green hushing? What do you mean by green hushing?
Green hushing is when you think you're doing good, but you don't want to raise your head above the wall to say you're good, because nearly in every instance, someone's got something to say against the thing you're doing. You know, I guess EVs is an example. People are transitioning from ICE vehicles to EVs. They think they're doing well, but then you get an audience that say, well, no cars is better than EVs, and then you get shot down. And that's happening quite a lot across the board. So people just tend to do their thing and stay quiet instead.
So there's a real dilemma in the Createch world, which is at this moment, I mean, quite a few of the founders have said to us, look, you know, we've been asked by our investors to give our green credentials as part of, you know, our pitch to them. But we are very nervous of kind of overstating things because, first of all, we know they will hold us to whatever we've said. And sometimes, you know, that's quite a difficult thing to live up to. But exactly what you said, Dave said, you know, the chances are that it will end up in some kind of public communications somewhere. But by that time, the whole business may have pivoted to somewhere else. And, you know, that'll be a kind of a problem. Martin, we're just coming up to the end of our time. So this might be a good time to just kind of pull it together.
Yeah, I mean, so thank you very much for all the attendees, and good to see, you know, there is awareness, interest, desire, and action already on the tool, and we hope that others will try it out. As I mentioned, the next stage of this is to explore this peer-to-peer network idea, and sort of peer-to-peer network mentoring, something around that areas, and watch out for something later in the year on that. What I should mention, which I should mention at the beginning, is to say thanks to UKRI and the Strategic Priorities Fund distributed by University for the Creative Arts for the funding of the tool and the activities. So thanks to UKRI, SPF for the funding. One should always mention the funders in all initiatives. So we hope that you use the tool. We hope you find it useful. As a result of either the presentation and or hopefully using the tool, if you do have any queries, you do have any feedback, please sort of send that on to Trevor. Short, sharp emails are best requested. But other than that, everybody have a great weekend, and we will create a link of the recording. We'll upload it to the website, and we'll distribute that to the attendees. I think also possibly with the previous research, because maybe the presentation has sort of garnered some further interest into some of the material, unique material we've produced behind this. So thank you all very much. And thanks also to my co-host Trevor in driving the tool development and the presentation today. And everybody have a great weekend.
And thank you to Nick and to Alex. Take care all. Bye.
Good. Welcome. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.